I'm a big Souls fan, been playing since the Dark Souls PC release, but I've never played all the way through Bloodborne. Not for a lack of trying, but that frame rate is awful, so I'm patiently waiting for the remaster or 60 FPS patch that's totally releasing, any day now. However, I've played enough of Bloodborne to understand its atmosphere and overall aesthetic are second to none. Roaming through the gloomy streets, speaking with terrified citizens who have all but given up hope on their world ever returning back to normal. But we're not here for a Bloodborne deep dive. Enter Steelrising. What I just showed were some really neat combat moments from Steelrising, the latest entry from developer Spider's eclectic catalog of games, and one that seems to inherit quite a bit from that stranded PlayStation 4 exclusive. And while I haven't played the entirety of Bloodborne, what I have seen out of From Software's alleged masterpiece certainly tops Spider's latest outing. But that's not necessarily a knock on Steelrising, as I don't think it's trying to mimic Bloodborne in every sense, and really trying to do its own thing. Rather, it takes some of the more standout aspects of Bloodborne, such as its exploration, its mix between physical and ranged gameplay, and the overall dreariness that envelops every square inch of the world, and provides its own twist by dropping those aspects into a more realistic setting, the French Revolution in the late 1700s. If you know your French history, you know that the French Revolution ended the reign of King Louis XVI and established a more democratic rule. But this victory didn't come easily. If you know your basic people skills, you understand that someone in power is usually reluctant to give up that power, and it must be pried from their cold, dead hands. And in the case of Steelrising, Louis was certainly reluctant. To establish a bit of backdrop from my quick research, the French population was growing at an exponential rate, and the king's reign couldn't handle this on a social, economic, or political level. Slavery ran amok, inflation ran rampant, and the people's morale ran at a steady level of generally displeased. In Spider's alternate history take on everything, the tyrannical King Louis understood his people's unhappiness to some degree, and he understood there was some sort of rebellion forming against him. His distrust of those around him led to the development of a robot army. These robots were developed initially to assist humans, serving as entertainers and assistants of all sorts. But they were secretly sleeper agents ready to turn an attack upon the king's command. He activated this army to quell the rebellion, causing an almost apocalyptic level of death and destruction. You play as a customizable version of one of these robots, also known as automats. Aegis, Queen Marie Antoinette's bodyguard to be exact. Distrustful of the king's actions, the queen sends Aegis into Paris to discover exactly what's going on, and to find her creator to put a stop to it all. I bet you weren't expecting a small alternative history lesson today, were you? As is typically the case with Spider's games, what an intriguing start. Injecting the French Revolution with a little steampunk and magic isn't something a lot of games have done. And for the studio's first attempt at a Souls-like, it's just as quirky as its fans would expect, for better and for worse. Since combat is the most important part of these games, let's start with that. Melee combat is mostly what you'd expect from this class of game, with lighter heavy attacks, a charged heavy attack, and a jump attack available to you. Aegis also has a special attack which varies based on your weapon, as well as a dodge. There are items to swap through and a hotbar to use them in as well. Fights involve balancing an endurance bar that goes down with each dodge or attack, while trying to whittle down enemy health bars and inflict elemental damage by freezing, shocking, or setting them on fire. Set an enemy on fire to inflict passive damage, freeze them to get in some free hits, or shock them to make each of your hits do more damage. These elements can also be applied to Aegis, with the freeze element being the most worrisome. The endurance bar includes an active reload type feature for the risk takers out there. If you let your endurance run all the way out, it will obviously recharge. But before it recharges, the bar offers up one last chance at redemption through an additional cooldown. If you press the interact button during this cooldown, cooldown, you'll restore the bar to that point, but suffer from a freeze debuff. The faster you press the button, the higher your endurance bar restores, but the more severe the debuff. And if you press the button before the cooldown starts, while it's in this red phase, you're punished, and the cooldown will take even longer to begin. This effect compounds to the point where it can take nearly 5 seconds to cool down if you keep messing up. And even when you're getting it right, if you let the freeze debuff fill up, Aegis freezes, which is not ideal when you're in the middle of a fight. I appreciate this mechanic for rewarding more aggressive players by allowing us to risk an elemental debuff and longer endurance cooldown for a few extra hits. If you get good with this, you can move through fights a lot faster, saving you a bunch of time and making you feel like a badass. Imagine a tough enemy is only 2 hits from death, but your endurance bar just ran out. A few others are sneaking up from behind, but you want this big one wiped immediately. Sure, you can back off and wait for your endurance bar to restore, but the others might swarm by then. So, like the pro Souls player you are, you take advantage of this wonderful mechanic and restore your endurance almost entirely to wipe out the big boy before it's too late. That's always what happens, and you'll surely never mistime this and freeze in the middle of a big fight. Not even once. And if you're really not paying attention, you might activate the cooldown while an enemy with the freeze element fires at you. Your freeze debuff is already half full and you haven't noticed because you've been in a fight. You try a cooldown and you're done. Frozen. Enemies drop anima essence upon death, the energy that powers such automats. If you die, your anima remains at the death spot until you recover it or die again. Otherwise, you can turn in your anima at Vestals, ominous statues that rise to reveal operating chairs to upgrade Aegis or spend on items, weapon upgrades, and a few other things. If you sit in one, all enemies outside of bosses and mini-bosses come back to life. Sound familiar? I wonder why. I played as the Dancer class with a focus on my agility stat. Agility, alongside increasing my attack and special damage stats, boosts my immobilization stat. You see, each enemy has a little diamond in the middle, which fills up every time you hit them. Once it's full, the enemy is stunned and you can pull off a critical hit. The higher your immobilization stat, the more this bar fills up with each hit. When paired with a fast-hitting weapon, you can stun lock every enemy out there. Increase your critical hit multiplier, and you're wiping most enemies in just a few hits. My Aegis started with a transforming shield that I could fan out to block attacks with. I can then smush it together and swing it around for offensive attacks. Nothing I say can truly communicate how elegant this feels, so just know that this move plays as incredible as it looks. That said, I'm not much of a defensive player, so I quickly swapped to the Falchion and Saber weapon type, which has an agility affinity and complements my build. The weapon's special attack spins Aegis and lands a bunch of hits at once. So once I've built up my stats a bit, I'm immobilizing enemies immediately and dealing massive damage from all the hits I'm landing on them. Sure, I have almost no defense, but as long as I can keep dodging and landing hits, I'm all good. I also kept what's called a shield musket as my second weapon, which applied freeze to susceptible enemies. While you don't need a weapon that has an affinity for your build, it typically helps. In my case, my Falchion and Saber hit so fast that enemies couldn't even wind up an attack before I brought them down. That's why it has an agility affinity. Agility is useful only if you can land a bunch of hits. Conversely, my ranged weapon didn't complement my build from a statistical perspective, but it could inflict the freeze debuff, and freezing enemies from afar was pretty helpful regardless. You can customize Aegis even further through modules, swappable upgrades that can do various things like soften the freeze debuff blow after each endurance cooldown, or make you deal more damage at low health. Complementing my build, I used one that restored Aegis endurance completely after a critical hit, ensuring she was fully ready for the next fight immediately after winning the initial one. Bosses, however, are less enjoyable experiences. As you would probably expect, it takes more than a few hits to immobilize these larger robotic beasts. This required me to slow down and take some time to learn their moves, dodge, and go in for some quick hits before repeating the process. In the early game, the first few of these special enemies were a challenging change of pace, but that challenge didn't last long. Let's go over some of Steelrising's items. We have flame, ice, and fulmination or shock grenades, as well as petrification grenades that build up an enemy's mobilization bar. Thing is, these bombs are powerful and plentiful. Bosses, especially in a genre that focuses on challenge, should be some of the most memorable in-game moments. So why the hell can I just toss a petrification bomb, land some hits, get a critical hit, and rinse and repeat? What sort of balancing is this? Why are there so many of these bombs, and why are they so available to me? I'm not going to use them after all, so their inclusion essentially removes removes all of the challenge from these boss fights. And don't get me started on the endurance vial. This thing prevents your endurance bar from dropping at all for 30 seconds, essentially providing you with unlimited attacks for its entire duration. Unfortunately, even if you choose not to use these items, boss fights still fall short. Instead of providing unique visual and mechanical experiences, bosses feel a lot more like the same fights you've been having, only with a bigger automat with a ton of health. Every fight is an easily telegraphed attack, dodge to the side, wail on them, repeat. I wish I was exaggerating this. Here are some of the boss fights. Please, notice how similar the boss fights are to the general enemy fights, not just in how I approach these fights, but in how the bosses attack as well. Even the arenas are the same, just a big boring circle with nothing inside. Or even one of these scenarios very distinct to you? Could you recall any truly standout details based on what you just watched? Probably not. And again, even if the boss's attacks and scenarios were more unique, the items are so frequent that they mitigate any challenge anyways. Please, keep these fights in mind as you watch the rest of the video, because this is the start of a much bigger problem that permeates throughout the entire game. And some quick damage control, an update came out after I recorded this that addresses balance, boss difficulty, grenade damage, and more. I tried out the game a little to test all of these changes and didn't really find a notable difference. At first, the general enemies are objectively more intriguing. We have the humanoid monsters with one-handed weapons to start off, and while you may struggle with them at first as you get used to the game's rhythms, you'll soon be dancing around them regardless of your class. Then we have the serpents, slithery robots that shoot their respective elements at you as they snake around. I'd say the fire serpents are the most terrifying, but they're all quickly eliminated if you just wait for their attack and hit them from behind. From here, we've got our tankier versions of the basic baddies, a towering shield-bearing monstrosity, some easier four-legged enemies that are more threatening in groups, and my personal favorite, the acolytes. Acolytes look like your typical fare, but are a little bigger. Then they'll smash a ball in your face with a terrifying spin move that lasts deceptively long, and you'll surely get nailed once or twice before getting used to the timing. Even worse, later acolytes turn elemental and will smash you with frozen or fiery balls. As mentioned, my build excels when getting in as many hits as possible, as fast as possible, so I was having a great time figuring out the best ways to dash through to an enemy and start wailing before they can get a hit in. That is, I was having a great time until I wasn't. I loved the first 6 or so hours of this game, dreaming of how the rest of it will iterate on its early offerings. But something was missing, and it took me a bit to figure out why. Part of me felt that Aegis was lacking a varied moveset, but I quickly realized that may have been on me because I wasn't switching weapons. I paid to upgrade my weapon, and it's great for my build, so of course I'm going to use it and not switch to something else. Also, each weapon type introduces new moves and special abilities, so I don't think this is the problem. There are even jump attacks with each weapon, which brings the effective move count up by 2. As the game goes on, Aegis learns a few navigational abilities that also apply elemental effects in combat, adding further variety to battles and standing against my theory. I won't spoil the third, but the 2 abilities that are relevant to my review are the dash and the kick. The cinematic dash is a fantastic addition to the game, and paired with the jump button, Aegis can make some pretty crazy maneuvers that feel almost game-breaking. During combat, you can slam into an enemy while inflicting freeze, as well as dealing some damage. It's pretty badass. The kick is a little less useful while navigating, but for combat's sake, it's awesome. It slams Aegis' foot into the enemy while inflicting fire damage. The third, unspoiled ability inflicts the electric debuff. Outside of combat, the kick knocks down green doors, and I don't really see the point of this. You get the kick in the first half of the game, and it has unlimited use outside of combat. Oftentimes, these doors could have just been a corridor without anything blocking them, as you're never going to be here without the kick, so what's the point of having the door here aside from making the player do another action? One would think it's useful in marking a side area, but a lot of these are even on the main path, so that doesn't really work to differentiate side and main areas. Granted, the input is cool and the kicks are badass, but is that really the only reason it exists? I understand the game is going for a Metroidvania type thing where early areas have locked off side paths and you come back later to clear them, but I don't know. Kicking a door down is pretty one note. The dash you can use in all sorts of situations, even those where it wasn't meant to be used. The kick provides no form of experimentation. You can only use it in specific instances, and that's a shame. But I digress. It's useful in combat, and that's what matters most. So all of these abilities and weapons, when paired with items, bring with a fair amount of combat variety, though I must note that my melee attacks were also more useful than the abilities by the end, and I was only using the latter to unlock trophies at that point. So while my moveset wasn't exactly cut in half, I was most effective when using my weapons and not the elemental abilities. This could have been due to my build too, since elemental damage was not something I focused on, but my items inflicted a ton of status effects anyways. Either way, we can write off Aegis' moveset as the problem. Then, as I walked into my fourth hedge maze in what felt like just as many areas, and came across the same enemy from the previous three with the same moveset as before, everything came together. Steelrising has a repetition problem. On repetition, someone on my Stray video was not a fan of my thoughts on the Horizon series, and they let me know in a somewhat condescending way. One thing they honed in on was me calling Horizon repetitive, which I didn't even do in the video, I just did in a comment. Maybe that's why it pissed me off so much. Instead of saying something useful on that, they noted that every game is repetitive, and went on to list the basic actions in Stray, such as sprinting or jumping on an object. This is something that I found so unproductive and condescending that I didn't even respond. I guess you could consider this my response. Sorry if it's mean that I didn't respond, but that thought process just really set me off. But the point is still something that I really want to touch on. I think it's incredibly obvious that games are repetitive, so much so that in criticism, the topic can go without saying in most cases. I'm pretty sure everyone realizes you're doing the same set of actions over and over again. I don't think it's insightful to say this. We all know that a game developer's job is to hide that repetition by varying up whatever set of gameplay systems they have in place. Titanfall 2 varies up the shooter by experimenting with traversal and time travel gimmicks, and that's one of the most common praises that game has. Celeste constantly pits you and your dash ability against new environmental hazards, requiring you to explore all of the dash's applications if you want to make it through the game. By the time you're done with Celeste, it doesn't feel like there's anything more the game could have taught you. The mechanic was fully realized. And for the super relevant comparison, From Software's Soulsborne titles ensure that no area is remotely similar to the previous one, ensuring each evokes a sense of awe upon entering, at least most of the time. From Software does a similar job with enemies. Steelrising has hints of succeeding in both of these aspects, but because the areas are just a bit too similar and the enemies feel just a bit too samey, nothing stands out, which results in things feeling repetitive. I'm calling the game repetitive, but it's a little deeper than I can't believe I have to keep interacting with things the same way every time. It means that, for whatever reason, the game failed to change its mechanics up enough to keep things interesting or to fully explore the potential of those mechanics. I'm sure most of you already know this, but I still feel that it needs to be said. All of these words to say that a lack of variety or repetition seeps into almost every facet of Steelrising's design, and the game is worse off for it. Why are so many areas littered with blocked off streets in a hedge maze with a courtyard for the boss battle? Sure, a couple of them throw in some docks and some sewers, but it's not enough. The time of day might be different in some areas, and the enemies might have an alternate elemental attack, but it's still the same bots you fought before in an area where the sun is slightly more set. I can't stress enough the number of repeating sections within the main areas. Only one later area switches things up to a meaningful degree, but even then, it's littered with enemies you've already seen. It doesn't even matter that the combat is solid, since there's barely anything new or interesting to fight once you're halfway through the game. A fast travel system really would have helped make this game feel less monotonous as well, but including one would have seriously cut down on this game's runtime. Something to consider. One could argue that spiders tried to ground themselves and make Paris as realistic as possible, but even so, did Paris really have this many hedge mazes? Did all of the streets look this similar? Also, they gamified the hell out of things with an army of magic robots taking over the city. Why can't that imagination apply to the world design as well? And hey, even if the areas did change it up a bit, we'd still have the enemy variety to deal with. That was already an issue in the one area that stands out from the rest. But you know what makes things even worse? The game's side quests. Long story short, Steelrising's main plot involves you building up a rebellion full of real-life historical characters by saving them from powerful robots. As the rebellion develops, you learn a little bit more about how these robots came to be, and it's decided you must find your creator to stop the automats, as he's the only one who knows exactly how these things work. Throughout your journey, you'll learn more about which royals took the king's side during the rebellion and which didn't, and how they reported to him via flashbacks thanks to Aegis' spiritual abilities. These cutscenes, while short, are neat insights into what happened and follow the show don't tell mantra that makes for interesting storytelling. You also witness some genuinely terrifying moments as robots attack people. The entire thing is serviceable stuff, and I was reasonably engaged throughout the plot's runtime. While exploring, you'll also come across people trapped in their homes due to the raging automats. Fair enough. Should you choose to engage, most of these people will freak out and think you're going to kill them, considering you're one of those robots. Then they'll slowly calm down and end up asking for a favor, such as a doctor who needs healing tools to save his dying patient. These citizen stories add a bit of charm to the world, and some of them, such as the previously mentioned doctor one, showcase the people's perspective of a raging robot apocalypse. They're this game's version of Yarnum's citizens trapped in their homes, speaking to you in great fear through the unopened doors of the homes they're now stuck within.
My baby! My precious little baby! Stay away! Stay away from us!
Steelrising side quests receive almost none of this love. Provided mostly through the Rebellion's members, you're typically tasked with cleaning up their pre-apocalyptic messes. Monsieur Necker wants you to find his wife, and Mirabeau is having daddy issues. Few take advantage of the fantastical setting we find ourselves in, instead choosing to focus on boring human conflicts, not unlike the criticisms thrown at the live-action Transformers movies. Even worse is the side quests delivery. This game's side content is full of egotistical, powdered wig-wearing politicians talking at you about the most boring topics known to man. In a genre where gameplay should be the focus, why is there so much talking about mundane problems? Why aren't we saving the people from unique machines or learning more about the inner workings of such creations? We should be learning more about the alternative history this game presents, not doing chores for a bunch of dudes who couldn't figure anything out beforehand. These tasks aren't interesting from a gameplay perspective either, pretty much always consisting of running through a previously explored area to find a note, bringing that note back to the Rebellion, and getting talked at once again. Why create a combat-focused title only to inject it with bland dialogue? And since these quests require going back to previous areas, ones that all look really similar, it compounds their dreadful structure even more. You can only run through so many hedges to grab so many notes and bring them back to have so many boring conversations. The game's enemy variety can't support this either, and a completionist run makes that especially clear. I say this with great frustration, as one of the game's final side quests begins to explore death and spirituality in an interesting way, but ultimately falls flat from a gameplay perspective. I'd say more, but I don't want to spoil it. In terms of story, the only side cutscene to make me genuinely perk up and pay attention was one where a black nobleman attempted to justify his so-called ethical form of slavery, in that he treats his own slaves better than everyone else does, so it's okay that he has them. There's a long debate about this that's certainly worth experiencing.
Continue to line your pockets at their expense. The truth is, you refuse to upend the established colonial order because your entire fortune depends on it.
It's easy to criticize from atop Mount Olympus, Maximilian. You know nothing of the realities of Saint-Domingue. What would happen to all these people if I freed them tomorrow? Without an education, without a livelihood, I would be condemning them to the most abject misery. No. I must act with both compassion and realism.
But that's it. All of the other side quests and locations made things less fun. Wading through Steelrising's subpar level design and quest presentation results in brief moments of interesting commentary or standout world building. But instead of elevating the game in these moments as you'd expect, they just double to show how average the rest of it is. It's not so much the side quests themselves that are the issue, but it's the constant chatter and forced backtracking through unimaginative areas that's bland. These people are even standing in the same spot for most of the game, so you don't even get a different background to enjoy when being talked at. True history buffs might find something to enjoy here, as again, these are real characters from the actual revolution, and it's entirely possible their quirks and personalities are accurately represented here. But I imagine most people will struggle as hard as I did to care. Considering Spiders wanted to have a somewhat narrative-heavy game, Steelrising may have benefited from a Dishonored-like mission structure. Dishonored also features a rebellion secretly gathering to take down the man, but instead of various open-ended areas to explore, it sends you off on one-of-a-kind missions in carefully designed levels with tons of memorable moments and even some side objectives. After each mission, you return to a hub world, which allows the dialogue and world building to breathe without getting in the way of the gameplay. Of course, the level design would have to be a little different since Steelrising isn't a stealth game, but the locales were still neat and would absolutely fit in with what Steelrising has to offer. Dishonored features sewers, palaces, mansions, workshops, city streets, many locations that are also prevalent in Steelrising, but be it through their layout or their art design, the spaces in Dishonored stood out from one another. In Steelrising, few of these areas stand out from the rest. Steelrising totally could have had the rebellion sending you off on missions to retrieve new members or to learn more about the automats while still including side quests. Imagine going on covert missions through one-of-a-kind levels in the streets of Paris. Maybe you're running through Lafayette's district and he asks you to grab something from his house or check in on his mother. When you're there, maybe you uncover an automat helper he had who reveals some dark secret about the man and how he shouldn't be trusted. Maybe, just maybe, this more deliberate design would have addressed the lack of stage variety in the disruptive dialogue in Steelrising, but I guess we'll never know. But you know what hits hardest? That all of this repetition makes it feel like I'm hardly making progress. If a 3-hour play session involves running through areas I've already been before for boring notes and the occasional cutscene, then playing the game becomes unsatisfying. The experiences and subsequent rewards don't justify my effort, and that puts a bad aura around many of the positive feelings I have about this game. Don't get me wrong, I'd be lying to both you and myself if I denied that there's something special about running through an apocalyptic mid-revolution Paris as a magic robot fighting other magic robots. The way my dancer moved gracefully between enemy robots before coming in for the stun, then the kill. It's the similarly satisfying feeling that comes from other Soulsborne titles. But tell me you've played anything in a setting like this before. The citizen stories, atmosphere, the main plot, and the combat do a lot of the heavy lifting here, and I think fans of the genre might get something out of trying it out, but I can't stress how hard the rest of this game fell off for me as repetition set in. Once the tedious cutscenes popped up, once I struggled to differentiate between the areas, and once the uninspired side quests leaked through. I imagine you'll have more fun with the game if you streamline the main story. But that's also essentially saying you'll only enjoy the game if you play half of its content, and that's a little sad to admit. We should want to engage with the rebellion and help them out. We should feel rewarded for making the effort to explore and learn about the world, not exhausted. Some might argue that I'm treating Steelrising unfairly by comparing it to other Soulslikes instead of evaluating it on its own, but that's the thing. Steelrising doesn't have enough of an identity for me to criticize it on its own. This game doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it doesn't do anything better than its obvious inspirations. Sure, Steelrising's backdrop is intriguing, but so much of this game, from its combat to its world building to its quest design, is either too bland to recommend or done better elsewhere. Even during the parts where it's passable, I'd still rather be playing Neo, a From game, or even The Surge. See, The Surge is a series with a really unique gameplay gimmick in the body targeting system, and one that takes great advantage of its post-apocalyptic setting. Combat sees you targeting specific specific body parts so you can chop them off and attach them to your own body. It's a really interesting approach not seen in other Souls-likes, and it's something that adds to the gameplay instead of just being a small gimmick that lasts for a little bit and wears down its welcome. Alongside this, you're traveling through factories, a massive wall, a big city, and even a neighborhood. Whether or not you like these areas, you can't deny that they're distinct from one another. Granted, the Surge 2 is the one that really varied up its locations, so maybe if Steelrising gets a sequel, it can do the same. This isn't to mention the endless set of bugs. Make no mistake, the typical Spider's Eurojank carries into next gen as well. I experienced a crash that I thought bricked my console. I had entire conversations cut out saved only by the subtitles, and one of the boss fights was completely ruined by a pathing bug as well. It was disappointing, but expected from the studio based on its history. Like its From Software-powered contemporary, Steelrising attempts to pitch you against overwhelming odds, attempts to provide you with just enough to stand a chance, and attempts to reward you for mastering that limited toolset. Only, the game's odds aren't as overwhelming as it thinks. It provides you with more than enough to hold your ground, and mastery comes with less effort than one might expect. While I'm having a great time cutting all these enemies down in the backdrop of the French Revolution, there's a bit of a problem when the enemies you're fighting in the first area are just as common in the final, albeit with a slight elemental twist like fire or ice damage. Had Steelrising's side quests and level design focused more on the otherworldliness of all this, I may have been more forgiving on its initially engaging combat, and it might have stood a chance against its obvious inspirations. Steelrising brings some unique aspects to the table, and it comes so close to being a must-play entry in the Soulsborne genre, but it really didn't stick the landing, and that's a genuine shame. Thank you all for watching.